Hey everybody, welcome back to Reads for Truth, our greatest legacy. In our last episode, we discussed the fact that it's ultimately how we commune with God that determines what kind of person and nation we become. That's our greatest legacy. Today in part 2, we're going to pick it up from there, addressing now the epidemic that we face in our nation, which is deficit of biblical literacy and the family unit being broken apart, which has left this world, certainly United States and Europe and all around the world, and Asia included, to a bankrupt moral standard in the family, government, corporate culture, and the world at large. As I stated, today I'm going to show you that ultimately it's how we communicate with God that will determine what kind of person and our nation become. What kind of person we are will determine what kind of parent we are. That'll determine what our children become. It dictates how corporations will be run, how the government will be run, how society is run, the values of that society, how countries are run, continents, and ultimately the world. Welcome back to part 2. In part 1, we looked at 2 Samuel and the life of David and established that we as Christians and the world at large, I guess, face a deficit of biblical morality in the family, government, corporate culture, and our community, the country, and the world in whole. The bottom line is that we need to be salt and life to a dying world, to a culture that continues to degrade and a church that continues to degrade. And life and freedom, as we know today, is slipping through our fingers. It's really our fault because we haven't fought for it, right? We want to make sure we leave better for our children's generation, and rightly according to God's word and his ways. That's what's going to guide us. So where do we start? Well, first, we start with understanding and acceptance that the USA, as we know it from the past 7,500 years, is kind of gone. That's the history. Nations are always changing. We have to understand that. Now, was it a good way to go? No. It was done deliberately. It was done poorly. But really, the governments end up reflecting what the people want, and then the people see what that is. See this in the Bible all the time. Then they don't like it, what they kind of allowed, at least. So once we accept that, we're going to see that we can accept some responsibility in that. And that it's now a battle as to who will rebuild America. I can specifically see, speaking of America, and I'd say Europe too. It's not a fight over the country or the continent. It's a fight over who's going to rebuild it. Second, it's going to take at least one generation, if not two or more, to turn things around. And thirdly, we must embrace the fact that turning the world right side up in God's strength starts with equipping the next generation. That's what we do at Equipped Academy as well. It's in conjunction with the Reason for Truth. Check out equippedacademy.com. There's some great courses, everything from God and Gold, which is just about to come up, if not online already. We've got our basics, our flagship, which is that Equipped Basics and Advanced courses. Those are like the foundational courses. All kinds of other ones, Knowing God Rightly. Check that out. We need to be equipped better, to be leaders, to be fathers, to be mothers, rulers, and in a land that's ruled by what? Self-governance, certainly of America. So this all starts with family. And that's because the family tree grows out into the forest, right? The limbs grow out. It always grows in the direction of the sun. If the sun is not directly overhead, what happens? The tree grows crooked. And in light of that, ultimately becoming a crooked tree. Anyone who's father or mother knows that communication with their children is essential, and our employees and our constituents, if we're government, is essential to their well-being and their upbringing as children, developing them, right, into civilized, good people. But the question is, whose values are they going to reflect? The world's, their own, another religious, atheism, or Christianity? Pick your choice, right? But Christianity should be the way. Certainly, that's what made America great. But the domino effect, there's a great domino effect to creating and raising up small children. I mean, if you have children, you want to try really not to get divorced, because that just makes it all the more likely for the children to get divorced. That affects them, the family, the community, the churches, the country, the state, and the continent and the world. Governments around the world, let's be careful, right? That to go to God's word for his wisdom. That's what should be guiding us, not the counseling of the psychologist who's today's priest. Again, the USA and the world as we've known it in the past is simply history. We still have remnants of that. They're still trying to take that all down. But the question not so much is the present, but preparing young men and young ladies for the future. The world they're inheriting is much different, folks, than the ones that many of us did. And the one responsibility we have is to make sure that they inherit a world that they can get their hands around, and where God is present, and where they can actually make a difference for Christ and actually not be put down as believers in Jesus Christ. So the one thing all this can be assured of is that God is on the throne, and he's going to raise up and use us as a remnant to create a very different and very new world that's very different than we can imagine. And I think the bottom line is when you grow up in a pro-America's number one, you can never see anything other than that. And the older you are, the harder it is to see what's going on today. God's going to use those who know and serve him rightly to do God's will and do new great things if he doesn't come back. Some people, we don't know when Jesus is coming back. We don't. So you can't have apathy. You shouldn't. If you're wrong, if you have apathy, you should be doing the work the Lord has called you to. And it's up to him. It's his business when he returns. Let's not get focused on that. You get focused too much on that, you know what happens? You end up not focusing on what you're supposed to do today. People are going to hell. Why? Because you're focused on the wrong thing. That's exactly what the enemy wants. Think about that, okay? We need to make sure that we have greater commitment to the Bible, greater moral fortitude in this country, conviction, and that's going to take some pain to get there. So the life of the King David was very, very clear of how this starts. Absalom, remember? If David would have handled him a little bit more differently, I think that we would have seen a different outcome. Most likely would have Absalom, I think, would have probably taken over the throne. He would have been close with his dad. His dad could have mentored him, discipled him. So I'm going to come back in a later episode. I'm going to go more in depth about the life of David and kind of what happened and show you a little bit more about, I want to talk a little bit more about the life of David in terms of just the loyalty of his friends and how David regained the throne from Absalom and how that whole thing played out. But in the interim, thank you for tuning in. Let's make sure we do a couple things. And, I know I'm hammering it over here. There's great things that could lay ahead. We just have to determine we're going to grab it. We're going to prepare for it. But I can tell you, if you're hanging on to the past too tightly, it's great to look back at that photo album. But God has us in the present. And he's got great things in the future. But in the interim, from A to B, there's some pain in between there. So let's look at things biblically. It's, and at the end of the day, heaven is the ultimate. That's the goal. That's where we're going. Life is short. Breath is short. When you think about 50, 100 years, God forbid some live less. In light of eternity is a long time, and there's no pain there. That's the good news. So let's make sure we're doing the right thing and honoring God while we're here. Anyways, that being said, that's the good news. The good news is we can be joyful. You may not be happy, but you could be joyful. And that's all I'll leave you with today. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. Make sure, remember, you check out equippedacademy.com. If you want, join my community. There's some good stuff in there. It's not always just it's crazy like this particular series, but there's some uplifting stuff there as well. Check it out at stephengarofalo.com. Then make sure you hit the subscribe button, share this with your friends. This will help us spread the message. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. It is as you read the truth for today.